Hello and welcome to today's show. I'm very happy to have you listening. As always, I want to thank Connie for emailing me yesterday asking, can we get some women on the show, please? She says, Pete, I heard you with Eric Siegel after Roe v. Wade was overturned on Friday, and I know we need to hear from constitutional law experts, but when this morning I turned on the show and it was two dudes talking about women's bodies and not a woman to be found. Listen, Pete, I love you. Your heart is pure gold, and you fostered me through the best decade of personal battles without even knowing. I trust you. That's why I'm asking you to please do better. Women's voices need to be heard on this platform, especially in the wake of this moment. Please spend today finding women's voices for tomorrow's episode. We desperately need it. Well, Connie, I emailed her back and I said, I completely agree. And I actually didn't make that decision. I don't book the show very far ahead of time. As you know, I'm pretty nimble at getting the most relevant guests. But here's what happened. And I explained that Val and the girls went on vacation and that I took a few days off, a long-planned few days off. And I was supposed to leave Friday morning, but I did a few pre-tapes, including my conversation with Tim Wise today, that I could play while I am off. I wasn't anticipating the Roe decision on Friday. So even though I was packed and ready to go, I went back to the shed, taped a quick thing with Eric, who suggested it. Obviously, I completely agree, Connie, with you and everybody else. And I have a whole bunch of women that I'm looking forward to talking to and discussing these issues with. If you're not outraged, folks, then you're not paying attention. Then I can't understand how you're not. But next week, I'll definitely get a lot of those voices on. So I hope that clears up for Connie and anybody else, because I do have Tim Wise joining me. And Tim and I also talked right when the news came out on Friday. So hit him and let him think about it, and he responds to it. And I think it's important. I think it's important that men actually talk about this issue, seeing as that we are the problem. We're the ones creating these inequities and obviously fostering these decisions, including the one overturning Roe v. Wade. So anyway, I hope that clears it up for you. Yeah, I'm taking a few days off this week, but I do have some great conversations today. It's Tim Wise, everybody, and a lot of people loving my conversation with Jeff Charlotte yesterday. Thank you very much for all those emails. Tim, of course, is an anti-racist author, speaker, scholar, and commentator who I absolutely love. He's authored so many books, I think like 7 books, most recently Dispatches from the Race War, and we always love when he joins the conversation. I think you're going to love this. I think that if you're not following Tim on Twitter at TimJacobWise, you're missing out. Also, read all of his pieces at Medium, timjwise.medium.com. Here we go with today's conversation with the great Tim Wise. All right, there he is, Tim Wise. Very happy I got Tim on this week, and I was pretty disappointed when I realized you hadn't been writing for a little while, and I demand an explanation because you pump out so much good stuff, and you're one of the few people who I go and check on, and I got worried about you. Is everything okay?
Everything's good. I just used up all the words. I don't have any more words. I used all of them.
Not true.
Well, I had to go back and refuel the word. No, I just, as we were joking before we started, I really since last June, so it's been a year, I've been turning out 10 to 15 pieces a month over at Medium. And I just sort of hit a wall where I just needed to take a little break. I actually had a conference, so I went out of town for 3 or 4 days. And that was the first time I'd gone out for that long in a while because of COVID. And just being back on the road, quote unquote, sort of took me out of my normal headspace of what I do in a typical day, which is, put on a clean shirt and go to my office and try to write something. So now I've got about 7 or 8 pieces that are in production, so to speak. I'll probably pull the trigger on those here in the next few days. So, I'll get back to writing soon. I just sort of taking a little break. My kid, youngest kid graduated from high school, getting ready for college and all that. So we're a lot of family stuff going on, too.
Well, congratulations on that. Very exciting. And real quick, where are you on 8th grade graduations? That's been a divisive scandal on my show this past week.
Like making a big deal of them, you mean? That kind of thing?
Yeah, and yes, I made a joke, which apparently wasn't considered a joke, that I didn't want to go. I said on Twitter that I didn't want to go. There's 800 kids. It's going to be cold and rainy. They just read 800 names, and it's a competition for, who loves their kid the most screaming. I'm like, I'm good. And I got destroyed for being the worst father in the world. But
there's part of me that didn't want to go to my own kids' 8th grade graduations for that very reason. I mean, obviously I'm teasing. I loved being there, but it is I don't know, like when I graduated from 8th grade, nobody gave a shit. It was just like, oh, great. You're going to high school next year. Welcome to the real world or whatever. It was It was just sort of, you were out of the kiddie pool and now you get to go into the deep end. It wasn't a huge production. I don't think we did a graduation. I think we got a yearbook or something, but it wasn't like a huge deal. So I think it's interesting that we've made such a big deal out of it. And we do it now even for like kindergarten as like a ceremony and shit. I don't know. Like, to me, it's a bit overdone. And if you got 800 kids, and you're just like reading off names and parents are jumping and screaming about the great accomplishment of having finished 8th grade. I don't know. Like, it's a little much to me. I mean, I would go if it was a dear friend whose kid was graduating 8th grade, I guess.
You would go to a friend's 8th grade graduation?
Like a dear friend, like a really close friend, not like somebody not like a Facebook friend.
Wow. That's impressive. Really impressive. Good to be friends.
I don't know. It depends on if I had something else to do. Like, I don't know.
Well, there's certainly plenty to talk with you about, and you've been tweeting as well, and everybody should certainly be following you there and reading all of your stuff at Medium. But, before we get into some of your recent pieces, how closely have you watched the January 6th committee hearings?
I have only watched sort of the excerpts and the outtakes and the collected best of stuff. I can't, going back to the Iran-Contra hearings in the 80s, I learned that I just can't watch this shit live. There's something about it that my blood pressure, I trust others to filter it for me and to tell me like, hey, watch this. And then I can sort of evaluate what I think about it, but I cannot watch it live. Even when I have the time to do it, I'm home, I work from home, I could do it. But I just know that my blood pressure will spike, and I'm, 53 and I'm borderline blood pressure, and I don't need anything to make my life more complicated. So I have watched the excerpts and the outtakes, and it's been it's been fascinating. To me, the most fascinating thing is watching a guy, Rusty Bowers, is that his name? I get these guys that are named for nails that give you tetanus. I get them all confused, but Rusty Bowers or whatever his name is. The most fascinating thing, here's a guy who says, this dude asked me to violate the Constitution, break the law, violate my conscience before God Almighty, and his people threatened to kill me and my dying daughter who was dying in my house, but I'd vote for him again. Like, at some point, that's when you just go, these people are a cult and they cannot be saved. All these folks are trying to make Rusty Bowers into this hero. And then he turns around that very day and says, but I'd vote for this guy again, even though his people want to kill me and my family. And he asked me to violate my conscience and the law. I don't understand what it is that they are so worried about the left, and not even the left, Joe Biden. What are they worried about Joe Biden doing that makes them willing to vote for a guy who they admit is essentially an insurrectionist, a traitor, asking them to violate their conscience? What is it they're worried about? They're worried about an infrastructure bill?
No, well, hold on. I think it's pretty clear what they're worried about. And I think that we can talk about this. It's the Supreme Court.
They've got the Supreme Court. I mean, the thing is, they've got it, right? The next person, the next people they're going to be replacing are going to be other conservatives. The oldest one on the court now is Thomas, right? So like, they're not even going to get another justice to replace a liberal. That's not what's coming down the line in the next few years. So I don't even think that's it. I think they hate so much the very idea of anything that is left of Joe Lieberman, which is to say anything that's not, ridiculously reactionary, that or left of Joe Manchin, that they just hate Democrats so much that they really are so beholden to a base that views people on the left as pedophiles and satanic baby killers and eaters of flesh or whatever the hell, mutant pod people or whatever Alex Jones thinks, that they actually believe that it's the end of the world if Joe Biden, the most conciliatory Democrat that you're likely to find in the last 30 years, were to be reelected, or someone else in the Democratic Party. It just is, it's fascinating to me, that level of hostility that says, even if this guy is an insurrectionist who violated his oath of office and asked me to violate the Constitution, I'd still vote for him. I
don't you think, though, this is, as you have written so much, a cultural war at the most local level? So, Joe Biden represents liberals like me in my town, or I represent him. And what I represent is wanting pluralism, wanting diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And that's really what they're afraid of, right? What they're really afraid of is what the Democratic Party and what liberalism in a broad sense symbolically represents, right? It's not really substantive policy differences that they're even thinking about. It is the symbolism of liberalism of the Democratic Party. They view the party and liberalism generally as the thing of those people, whether those people are black people, whether those people are undocumented people, whether those people are LGBTQ people, whether those people are feminist, whether those people are, whatever, right? They view them as it's them versus us. And it's important, I think, for Democrats to understand that that's all politics is to these folks, that it's not really about substantive policy, because my fear is always that the Democrats will, as they always do, respond to these moments with another great bill for something. Like we're gonna make sure that you get, whether it's broadband internet or whether it's better health care. And I'm not saying those things aren't important. God knows we need better health care. We need all kinds of things. But that's not what decisions are being made on right now. That's not what the right and the people who are even remotely interested in voting for that kind of stuff. The idea that they're actually angry about inflation and gas prices, I think that's bullshit. I don't think these people actually have any idea how international oil markets work. They obviously don't. But because they act as if somehow, if we just drill more, gas would be 23 cents a gallon. You don't get to drill and keep your own shit. It's not like farm to table produce. You don't just grow it out back and then you get to keep it in your house and put it in your car, like straight from the earth to your gas tank. That's not how the shit works. But so I think people know that's not, some people don't know
it's that. Not like the moonshine market.
Right. It's not like I'm whipping this up in the still in my backyard, and I get to keep all the gas that I can drill. Like, that's not how it works. And inflation, all the inflation that we're experiencing right now would be experienced no matter who the president was, because it's all related to this public health emergency that we've been experiencing for the last several years, and what that has done to the supply chains, what that has done to demand versus supply. And that would have been here no matter who was president. So the idea, I'm not saying that people aren't focused on that. They obviously are, because they don't understand how these things actually work. But that's not something you can't just, like Joe Biden said, we're going to give a federal tax holiday for the gas. And that's going to bring what 18 cents maybe off the gallon. That's going to do nothing. Right. No one is going to reward him for that. Right. All that's going to do is blow a big hole in the highway infrastructure repair funds, because that's where a lot of that money comes from the federal gas tax. And it's not going to work, because ultimately it's not like folks are going to go, oh, well, gas was really high, but Joe Biden had a policy proposal to fix that. That's not why they dislike Joe Biden. That's not why they dislike Democrats. They didn't give Barack Obama credit when gas was at a historic low, right? So it's not about gas prices. It's about what Barack Obama symbolized to them. Barack Obama could have sent everybody a big gold coin in the mail that was worth thousands and millions of dollars, and they still would have been like, yeah, but I'm pretty sure he's from Kenya. That's the thing. So Democrats have got to get out of this mentality that it's all about the economy and can we deliver the goods? And that's what people are looking for, is people who will put more money in their pocket. These folks are lost to that politics right now. And they are off in a symbolic place where it's just about good and evil. And unless you're prepared to flip that script and say, no, actually, you're the evil. You're that. The people who stormed the Capitol and threatened to murder the vice president and the president that encouraged them to do that, y'all are the bad ones. And we have to save democracy from you. Unless you're prepared to do that, I think the Democratic Party's doomed. And unfortunately, they keep doing the same shit over and over again, thinking it's going to work, and it never does.
Yeah, I'm not sure, how best to message that, but or what I don't know exactly what to say about what Democrats are doing wrong or should be doing in terms of messaging, much less policy. But I do love the essay that you wrote along these lines. Your most recent one: lots of Americans would sacrifice democracy for cheap gas, because you do a great job capturing American culture, capturing what certain types of apathetic folks, certainly a lot of young folks, are focused on, and what the priorities are. And it's so true. I'm just thinking, and maybe you'll weave something in your answer here about Elvis, because this new Elvis movie's out. You're in Tennessee, and this idea that he was not real. He never created anything, and he was celebrated because, in a way, he was like tacky and the king of white trash. I was just reading about, and that's what Trump is. And you read about what Trump represents with his bullshit gold-plated toilets and all of that stuff. And this idea that Americans are distracted and obsessed with things that don't actually impact their lives. So wherever you want to pick up, this essay is so good at capturing all of that.
Thank you. Well, the reason I wrote the piece, first of all, was it just was stunning to me how many people are telling pollsters, yeah, I know there was this insurrection thing and I don't really like Trump, but God, gas prices and inflation. And in addition to not understanding how those things work, which we already talked about, it just struck me how odd it is that people would make their decision about who to vote for Congress or the presidency based on whether prices were, 8% high inflation. Don't get me wrong. And I'm not saying it's no big deal. And I'm fortunate enough to be in a economic position where that doesn't hit me the way it does someone who's struggling. I get it. But the people who are angriest about this aren't the people that are the poorest. Like the people that are really hardcore working class struggling to get by, a lot of them aren't voting at all. And if they are, they're voting on a much broader range of things. They can usually see through the bullshit. It's that middle brow. That's why I referred to it in the piece as this sort of middle brow culture, right? These folks who are not really the working class, certainly not the poor, and they're not rich. They're just these people that have this sort of these affectations to aspire to Donald Trump type wealth. Yeah. These are the folks who aspire to all that Instagram wealth bullshit. Like, look at my new watch, look at my cool car. Look, I'm on a beach somewhere, running up a credit card in debts that I'm not going to be able to pay. But isn't it cool that, real working class people don't do that shit? Poor people aren't into that. Right. Poor folks know better than to think Donald Trump is really all that. And rich people know that he's tacky. But it's that middle group that just sort of is the seedbed of fascism so often that, they're not poor enough to actually understand that we need to change the system because they're getting screwed. But they're not rich enough to actually feel secure. So they got to look down on somebody, which is what they do to poor people. And then they got to look up to these wealthy people and venerate them, especially if they have an attitude that's all about grabbing their balls and telling the rest of the world how much better they are than them. And so when you have that kind of mentality, you think to yourself, God damn it, I got to put more gas at $5 a tank. Screw this. And you start prioritizing these things over democracy, over the integrity of the society in which you live, over the fact that the country's coming apart at the seams. But as long as I can fill up my truck, my Hummer, my whatever the hell it is, because I wouldn't want to get an electric car because we know who drives electric cars, and everybody says, well, they're expensive. No, some electric cars are expensive. Some of them are actually no different than a typical, combustion engine car. But we don't want to drive it because it doesn't have power. I can't roll coal.
Not true. It does have power. It has so much more power.
I know they do. But
don't make me argue with your fake character. This is ridiculous. Yes, it does. Have you ever got
the fact that I always, and I want to apologize to the audience for the fact that I always make my fake character some Southern. It's because I'm from the South. If I were not from the South, what I just did would be horribly obnoxious.
No, it's part of you. I allow for it because I've always, maybe people don't know, so I'm glad you remind them. But there's a part of you that is that person that you're trying to push down.
Absolutely. And so I just want, and I'm glad you reminded everybody of that because that is true. Look, I am that guy at some level. Yes. I come from that, at least in part. And so
a lot of people don't know about your belt buckles, but I do.
No, that's true. No, the only big belt buckle I ever had, oddly enough, and I've never ever admitted this to anyone. I used to be a huge Kiss fanatic when I was a kid. And I had a huge Kiss belt buckle in 1976, obnoxious as hell. And not very Nashville, I should just point out. It was not very Nashville. But anyway, back to this piece. By the way, for people who are listening,
it explains why you have the makeup on. I didn't want to ask.
I did go.
Are you on your way to a convention, Tim?
No, but on Halloween, when I was 10 or 11, I did go to Halloween as Paul Stanley.
Oh, yeah. That was probably one of the top costumes that year. What were you're digressing from? I'm sorry. I forgot now.
Oh, no. My digression was I was going to say that the thing about the culture that drives me nuts is that we encourage this level of narcissism and me.
Yeah.
Over we the people. Like, we the people's the slogan, right? Not me the customer, right? That's not the slogan. And yet what we do is we've created a society where as long as I'm getting my needs met by, cheap gas and relatively cheap bananas or whatever the hell it is, or cheap technology or an iPhone number 37X31, whatever the hell version is coming out next week, then I'm happy. And if it's fascism, but I got a phone and I got my cheap gas and I can go to the beach and I can, drink my tequila and I can listen to my music and everything's fine. And there's something fundamentally about that that's incredibly dangerous. It's very much Weimar Republic before that was overthrown on behalf of fascism, right? There's a lot of bread and circus in Weimar. There was a lot of, it's what cabaret is about, right? Like, this decadence, this sort of consumerism, this sort of party all the time, everything's great. And then all of a sudden it's really not so great. And so there's that piece. There's also this thing that I just have never been able to get my head around, voting for somebody solely based on whether your situation got better or worse in the last couple of years, right? Like, to me, that's just an incredibly limited worldview. And I'm not trying to claim like ethical superiority, but I'll tell you right now, I've never done that. Even when I was broke, I didn't sit there and think like I didn't benefit, like during the Clinton years when the tech boom was going on and the economy was growing, those were some really lean years for me. But I never sat there and was like, well, shit, I think I'll vote for Bob Dole then. Or I think, in a few years, I'll vote for some Republican. I actually did really well. My career started to take off during the years of George W. Bush, and it continued under Obama. And, that stupid ass tax cut that Trump pushed through, I benefited from that. My taxes went down significantly as a result of that legislation. But I would never sit there and think to myself, well, shit, I think I want to reward Donald Trump with my vote for cutting my taxes, because I know it isn't all about me. I know that there's 330 million people in this country, and it isn't all about me. Right. So the idea that that's what people make their decisions on is like their gas price or whatever. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm not saying it's not relevant, but it just seems to me that's an incredibly limited way to make decisions, especially when the president has very little to do with what the price of gas is going to be in the first place. Very little to do with the inflation rate. Inflation's been very low for 20 years, whether it was a Democrat or a Republican in office. And there are a lot of global economic reasons for that. And they were all disrupted by COVID. So the idea that I'm going to punish you for not bringing inflation down, it just is, it speaks to the problem in our educational system. We don't understand how the economy works. And yet instead of, saying maybe we need better economics education, maybe we need better civic literacy, instead we have people running around saying, actually, we want less civic literacy. We don't want to talk about racism. We don't want to talk about sexuality. We don't want to talk about any of these issues that might make somebody uncomfortable. Let's just wave a flag and move along. And that's why we get in this position that we're in, where the culture, rewards silliness.
So much of it seems to has to do with, our economic system too. I mean, so much of what you're saying it just instructs us to get as much as we can. And by the way, to some extent, it makes sense, because you're going to, if you lose your job, you're going to lose your health insurance. So you better have as much as you can and beat the other guy and be better. And this idea that it seems more like conservative-minded people subscribe to obviously the idea of authoritarianism, and there's a lot of research, I guess, and scholarship on that. But more importantly, this idea that I'm better than you, or that the United States is better than you. It's a very that mentality has always escaped me too, because I always want to try to do good things and whatever. And it's just this idea of winning and being better. All goes to what you're saying, and you make some really specific examples in this essay. But let me ask you something else, Tim, because you and I are talking on Friday in the morning, and my phone just blew up. And I don't know, you're probably obviously focused here, but the Supreme Court has overturned Roe v. Wade while we were talking. Those are the headlines.
Yeah.
Axios, Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade. NBC News, Supreme Court wipes away constitutional guarantee of abortion rights, overturning Roe v. Wade. CNN, Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade. I mean, these are the headlines across the spectrum. And then Fox News is focused on the python that they caught in the swamp in Florida. But no, I don't know what Fox News is. But I know I'm catching you here, but you've written about this and everything behind it, and obviously religion. What is your reaction? I'm glad I've got you, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I don't think you'll have any issue talking about it.
Well, I mean, it's not surprising. This is what these folks have been pushing for and fighting for all of my adult life, and even going back to before I was an adult. So I guess they got what they wanted, which is the ability to essentially turn women into involuntary incubators for the state because somebody's reading of the Bible says that that's how it ought to be. Make no mistake, the anti-abortion position, which I respect for individuals if that's their position. Like, I have no problem if your interpretation of scripture and or science tells you, or philosophy, that a fetus or an embryo is fully human and a person in the full sense of the word, deserving of respect, then you should absolutely be able to live your life by that principle. But the idea that you would be able to impose that on others is one that you can only endorse by essentially imposing your religious interpretation of personhood on others who don't share it, which seems to me a pretty blatant violation of religious freedom that's in the First Amendment, in addition to being sort of inherently authoritarian. And it ultimately now sets up a situation where we are going to see, and we've already seen this even in the Roe era, where women who had, this has already been happening, women who would have miscarriages in certain states in this country being investigated because certain states already had sort of fetal protection laws that were not as strict as they will be able to be now, but that would allow for, investigations of those things. That's going to go through the roof now. You're going to have states throughout the country that are, we know, going to immediately, probably by the end of the day, ban all abortion or virtually all abortion, and women that have just natural miscarriages, which about 20%, I think, of all pregnancies end in spontaneous abortion anyway, 15 to 20%, something like that. And if there's anything suspicious, or if their boyfriend thinks it's suspicious, or their husband thinks it's suspicious, or their neighbor thinks it's suspicious, going to sort of investigate. And what did they kill their baby? And did they, and there's this sort of war on women's reproductive freedom and autonomy. Is going to get worse. It is not going to help families. It is not going to help, quote unquote, unborn children. It is going to actually ensure less freedom for everyone. And it's sort of stunning. It's going to take me probably a day or so to collect all my thoughts on it. But
well, I appreciate you sharing in real time everything that you just said. I know that's not easy. Why is everything moving backwards so quickly?
I think,
or seemingly, maybe I'm wrong.
I think that this is the thing that we don't appreciate enough in this country and in our political discussions. When we talk about, the reason people get confused sometimes is that when we talk about left and right, liberal and conservative, we have a very simplistic understanding of what those things really mean, right? So if you ask most people, well, what does it mean to be a conservative? They would say, well, small government, less regulation, da-da-da-da-da. But then something like this happens that's about, essentially regulating women and imposing restrictions on reproductive autonomy. So you go, God, well, but if you for less government, why do you want the government making these, prohibiting these decisions? Wouldn't you want more freedom? So then people are like, well, it's confusing, but it's not confusing if you understand what liberal and conservative or what right and left really mean. And what they mean historically is not about big government, small government, regulation, deregulation, taxes, low taxes. It's about who controls and who makes the decisions. To be on the right historically was to endorse traditional lines of authority and hierarchy. So you think about right and left, those very terms politically come to us from France. From revolutionary era France, right? And so the idea was the royalists, the monarchists, those who believed in the old order, the ancien regime, were on the right of the governing body of the assembly, and those on the left were those who opposed that. That's where these terms sort of historically come from, right? And so the right has always been about restoring or maintaining traditional authority, which means what? Well, in this era, that would mean Christian authority, white authority, male authority, the authority of the wealthy and powerful. Heterosexual authority, right? So any dominant group, the right essentially believes that they are the better people and the better people should govern. And the left historically has been about challenging traditional authority and the traditional order and saying, actually, this doesn't work for everyone. Actually, this isn't positive. Actually, we need a different kind of social order. So when you understand it that way, all the things that the right does actually begin to make sense. Why would they want to regulate LGBTQ relationships instead of supporting freedom? Well, because they view that as a usurpation of proper authority. Why would they want to restrict Muslims or anyone who isn't Christian if they believe in freedom and openness? Well, because traditional order says Christians should rule, right? Why would they want to restrict women? Well, because men should rule. Why would they want to impose barriers and obstacles to people of color or immigrants of color? Well, because white, real Americans ought to make these decisions. All of it starts to make sense if you actually understand the difference between what Corey Robin calls the reactionary mind and the mind of progressivism or liberalism or the left, right? And so then it starts to make sense. So the real question for us isn't, well, do you like government or do you not like government? Right and left both use government as tools. The question is, in whose interest is government used? Right. Who's it being used for? Who wins and who loses? If you're happy with traditional authority, I mean, if you think that the straight, rich white men are doing a great job, then you ought to be on the right. Like, absolutely 100%, you should be casting your lot with them. If you don't think that rich Christian straight men have done such a fantastic job, and I would point you to the 2009 recession where a lot of them destroyed the economy. Like, that wasn't black people, brown people, Muslims.
I wonder about that when you say it's an anti-government idea. But the truth is, what something replaces government, whether it's Boss Hogg or some Monsanto. Or Exxon, if it's not
or
government
church or whatever.
If it's not government regulating your life, controlling your life, it's the biggest employer in town, which might be Costco or Amazon or something. It's something, and you want someone to fight for you and your family, whether it be insurance or property or whatever it is. And if it's
it's better to have that entity be one that you actually have some control over, at least theoretically, by being able to vote.
Exactly.
And by having to go buy shares.
Which is not the same. Right. Which is not the same. Even if you're a major shareholder, not necessarily.
You still can't really dictate the terms, even if you've got a shit ton of shares. Right?
Yeah. I'm a major shareholder with some shred of a conscience. And I say, next.
Right, exactly. Right. It makes no difference. So everybody supports government to some extent. And look, even the ones who are true anarchists, like real honest to God anarchists, are not just about let's abolish the government, because they also realize the bigness of corporations is a problem. They also believe that the bigness of religious institutions is a problem. Their philosophy is no gods, no masters, right? Whether that's a government god or master, whether that's a religious god or master, whether that's a corporate god or master. So real anarchists are not, let's just get rid of the state and let the private sector run shit. Let's just get rid of the state and let the priests and the rabbis and the ministers run shit. They actually believe, I think naively, because I'm not an anarchist, but they believe naively that we can just sort of self-organize and get rid of all hierarchy.
Right.
But at least they understand you can't just do one. Like, what I do respect about real anarchists is they're not just saying like, oh, the state's the problem. No, they're saying that hierarchy and domination and control are a problem, which I think is a legitimate argument to make. It's just a question of, well, what do we do with that?
Right.
Because people do seek domination and control based on their physical strength, their greed, their avarice or whatever. And you have to have some process for controlling that. And, we're going to make huge mistakes with it. But this is an example of where I think we think about government and we think about left and right so simplistically that we get all confused and we don't understand. And we say, well, they're being hypocritical when they say they're for less government, but they want to control women. No, that's not hypocritical, because they didn't mean what they said about less government. They just want government in the service of traditional leadership.
Yes. And they just want to win without having to follow any rules at all.
Right. Exactly.
That's where we're at. And I appreciate you explaining it so well, as always, Tim. I'll let you go, but man, so great to have you here every time, and I'm glad that you're hopefully going to be back to your normal writing. But you do whatever you need to do at your pace.
Oh yeah, like I said, I got a bunch of pieces. I'm just trying to figure out which order to send them out in. So
excellent. Well, go subscribe, everybody, and all the information for Tim is in the show notes, and I'll talk about it after I let Tim go. Thank you, as always, my friend, for joining me. So awesome. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Okay, folks, I hope you appreciated my conversation with Tim Wise. I am taking most of the week off, but posting interviews, I think, every day. I've still got Kenneth C. Davis joining me, Mike Grunwald talking about his new podcast about eating for the climate, as well as the great Dr. Michael Mann on climate. So stay tuned for all of those. Stay tuned. I mean, the podcast is over. I mean, they're coming up the rest of the week. Anyway, I hope you're doing okay. I look forward to connecting with you next week. Thank you very much for supporting me and allowing me a couple days off. I love you. Be the change you want to see. Bye-bye. John Carroll, take us out, brother.
Stand up, let the brave meet the challenge, let the meek weak flee. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. When you're tired of begging, saying pretty please, that's the time you gotta finally get up off of your knees. When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.